Mike, like when it comes to Ice Nine Kills, where they are now, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. That was something that you and Spencer spent years building to. The things that like Ben's talking about, just constantly having good quality merchandise and having a good quality experience. So what types of compromises or choices or things that perhaps were a little bit more expensive when you really wish they weren't in the early years of the Ice Nine Kills story that are paying off now?
Yeah, I mean, Spencer's always been a big dreamer and wanted to do things, some of the small stuff that we're talking about now. It wasn't an efficient use of our resources necessarily to get a custom website built, to have blood splatter happen. So even though, he has always had these kind of out of the box ideas, new ones have opened, or the opportunity to implement them has opened up as, the bands continue to grow. What I like about it is it's been a lot of fun, right? As the band continues to grow, we just have so much that we can sort of experiment with and play with and, pull in influences from other places. But, I think early on it still was, how do we within the resources we have, find the best designer? And, part of Ice Nine Kills' success across the board has been a consistent reinvestment of profits back into the machinery, no matter what it is, but especially in the merchandise component. It's not, not stepping over a dollar, now to get a dime or whatever that one is. Stepping over a dime to get a dollar. One of those. You guys know what I'm talking about. Dimes and dollars. Oh, you get a koozie for a dime. That's what it was.
First one. I think it goes for the first one.
Yeah. And that can be challenging to do. With developing artists, it's hard when you want some sort of payoff and sometimes just need some sort of payoff. It can be really challenging to take the money. I mean, we've invested pretty heavily in social media marketing and e-commerce, and the team that we've hired has a really good approach. Let's go in and take a certain percentage of the profits and just reinvest that. That way we're not having to consume all of it and pull all of it back in, but let's take, they've got some, thankfully they work with a lot of clients, so they've got their own best practices and know what really works to continue to move the level.
Carl, Spencer was talking earlier about using video to make an event out of the merchandise. You mentioned one of your other clients was doing that on Kings Road recently as well. Is there a level that an artist needs to get to before that type of event, making an event of a merch sale, makes sense? Or is this something that is sort of the biggest do it for a reason, and that's what makes them the biggest? Is there something about those artists who aren't selling perhaps the huge quantities on your website that it's not so much because of them, it's because of their lack of sort of oomph behind their marketing? Can you talk about the difference between those who are selling a lot versus those who are not?
I mean, I feel like a lot of that stuff kind of fits into the components of like the story of where the band is and kind of what they're focusing on at that time. I think a lot of bands would like to do more video, but I think, the biggest concern, I mean, even pre-pandemic kind of economy that bands are living in, it really comes down to budget and time and honestly ideas too. Because I don't think not every band, even if the band has a clear idea of what they want to see or what they want to put forward in terms of how they want to market the merchandise or market anything. There's a level of comfort, in the same way not every band feels comfortable doing VIP. Some bands kill it at VIP. Some bands are totally wired to that experience and that aspect of being a band, where there's a lot of bands who grew and got to a higher level before VIP was even really a component of a band's income. I think video is a similar thing in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of bands who just don't want to be in front of the camera or don't have video type ideas. And I think one of the worst things you can do when putting those things out there is to do it and then not do a good job, because there is a bit of a fine line on that, where it's like, if you have a clear vision, you know, and I think music videos are a similar way, but I think specifically when it comes to like promoting merch, creating content for social media or just marketing in general, whether it's merchandise or whether it's a tour or whatever, if you don't have a clear idea, less is more. And I think that works with merch. I think it works with merch lines. I think it works with marketing. It works in a lot of ways. Like there's nothing worse than like stretching for an idea that you're not either totally invested in or totally comfortable with, or have a fully fleshed out idea. Because sometimes you might get lucky, but you know, there's no examples that come to my head right now, but missing the mark on those kind of things, it's wasted money. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a couple $100 or even maybe it's more than that, you know, whether you have a person who does video and photo permanently on staff or not. Just, there's a lot of bands who just don't even really want to spend the money, because there's, you know, the margin of return on that, where it's like, all right, if I'm going to spend, I'm just going to pick a number out for easy rounding, but $1,000 on a video, we're going to use it, you know, one bit a week. There's some bands where that budget makes total sense, because it's like, well, you figure the royalty rates, you figure what we're going to do in sales, and this is going to generate an additional amount of sales. There's not a lot of bands willing to put their money into those kind of endeavors. And so I think it's just, I think each component just has to be a level of, it's a, you know, merchandise is a part of you know, the entire story of where a band is. And, you know, right now, usually e-commerce is sort of just, you know, Ian's worked at a merch company. You guys have, you know, being in bands and seeing the numbers. It's like live is the volume business of being any level of band, you know. If you're in a band that sells $500 in merchandise, your web store is probably not doing $500 a day, right? It's just that those numbers are pretty consistent in that, like, if you're doing $10,000 in merchandise, your web store is still not doing $10,000 that day. And so, you know, having that overall component right now, with e-commerce being one of the sole areas of quick monetization for bands, I would still keep in mind, like, there will be a world a year from now, and just spend your money in a way that, you know, feels right. That's really the best way to do it. So yeah, we've had some bands do video. We've had some bands do, you know, funny stuff. We've had bands do funny shirts. We have bands that don't like to do a lot of comedic stuff, or even get like tongue in cheek at all, you know? So it's just, each situation is different. Some bands just kind of lay in the background, and you could never get them in front of a camera unless you're pulling their teeth out, you know? I mean, there's no, each band is different. And so I think if you have a true vision, and you're at a level where there's actually a larger audience where you can do those kind of things and experiment, and sometimes take a couple punches, like, oh, that didn't really work, we don't need to do that again. You know, I think that sometimes you just have to be willing to know what your vision is, and let those decisions kind of fall from that.
Ian, can you talk about that a little bit? Like the idea of, I love these ideas from there's idea, and then there's execution. And I guess my question is, which is a bigger challenge for your clients? And then when you know that there are compromises that will need to happen with execution, how do you tailor the ideas so that way none of these attempts don't end up either half completed or just being unusable when done?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I see Mike chuckling over there, because our whole lives are spent in that middle ground between idea and execution. So, you know, look, and you have a perfect grouping of people here to do it. All of these guys here are experts in execution. Spencer is an expert in ideas and execution. Ben's execution, Carl's execution, Mike, everybody, like, you know, we have a really good topic here to discuss, because I think that the most important thing to do as a young artist is what we've been discussing here, really understanding the idea, really understanding the vision. If you don't do that, there's pieces that become gray, right? There's areas of the business that become gray, and they become, you know, areas where you have to focus more effort on, or bring additional people in to help supplement what you can't, you know, figure out on your own. As a younger artist, you always want to, you know, understand your brand concept, what, you know, what your logo looks like, what your colors look like, what your social voice is, what your, your musical voices, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have to find people that supplement those different areas. For instance, I manage a band called Papa Roach, great band. They've been around a heck of a long time. They had a big issue probably about 5 or so years ago where, from a merchandise perspective, they didn't understand who they were. They kind of knew what they liked when they saw it, but they didn't have a way to explain, how to get there, right? So they knew that their fans bought a certain color t-shirt. It's black, no surprise. They knew that their fans liked a particular type of music, had a particular type of lifestyle. They have a great, huge, amazing history of, millions of records sold and everything like that. You would think that a band of that stature really could understand what they visually could represent. They had a problem. We brought Carl in as a partner, and Kings Road has been an excellent partner for us in kind of taking what the data says is great about a band like Papa Roach and taking the lifestyle of those fans and making consistent, concise, really well done, important designs and profitable products. So that's just a small example of what every artist will deal with in any scale, right? If it's a small baby band who's just trying to figure out what their logo is, up to maybe not Metallica, they know what they're doing, but other bands that sort of struggle with that similar identity crisis on a cycle basis, on a yearly basis, on a whatever it is. I'm sure Spencer can walk through those types of things too.
Well, thanks for that, Ian. And Spencer, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to transition just a little bit, but I want to stick with this idea of idea versus execution. At what point in your career did you feel like you could execute a really great VIP program? And in retrospect, did you do it too early, too late, or was it right on time?
I think it all comes down to timing, and as Mike said before, it's like you got to make sometimes 1,000 mistakes before something works, and that's always sort of been built into the DNA of the band. Let's try this, let's try that, and kind of crossing the line sometime to define it, I think goes a long way. And I think just overall we started to see more success with merchandise when we stopped following the trends of pretty much everything, music, merchandise, and I think that's the key, and that's the hardest thing to do, in my opinion, is finding your identity and taking that to the next level, because I think a lot of bands make the mistake of trying to copy. And I think that, learning from other bands' success is a very different thing than copying what they're doing. And I think really paving our own lane was when we really started to see that growth. And it sort of coincided with when I think we found our unique sound and vision, which was on the Every Trick in the Book album cycle, where we had a clear, defined theme and started to build that, and then I think really came into our own with the music and the merchandise on the last album, because it had a broader appeal, and that's when I think it kind of took that turn.
And what about a VIP program?
I think we've done VIP for years, and Mike, I think we started doing that maybe, I don't know, I want to say 2013 or 14 when it was sort of becoming the norm. I think we were actually a little bit ahead of the curve on that. I think we started doing it before everyone was doing it, and it's cool to see the growth there. I remember doing a show in Austin, Texas, where there's 3 VIP, and just having them in our dressing room and being like, oh, we got 3 today, it's better than 1. And now seeing it grow to a point where I think we have to cap them out because they're selling out. Some of them, I think we had over 100 on some of the last headliners, and I think it's a great tool, and I think everyone should use it. I don't really know if there's too early of a time to use it, because I don't think you know until you get out on the field and start seeing what the results are. I don't know if it's like a bad look for a band to do a VIP and no one shows up, but you know, it could be. But I think there are clever ways to sort of not hide that, but you know, maybe say there's only 3 kids there. You know, say that was capped at 3. It's a great trick.
You got a couple hundred people in the room envious of 3 people. I think you're doing all right.
Yeah.
No, and I think the point, I just want to chime in on the point that Spencer had said about like copying people, because I can testify 100% from experience of being in a band that, you know, at the time we were playing in, you know, Mike, I guess metalcore world, I guess is the simplest way to describe it.
Sure.
You know, we spent a lot of time with bands that, you know, grew well beyond our level. And, you know, when you're in that moment and you're in the van and you're in Denver and you're playing second of 4 and the band that's headlining the show, it's like, hey, like you guys were the same size as us not that long ago, and you see this band on this trajectory. It's natural just to be like, okay, well, what are they doing? Right? This is what they're wearing on stage. Like there wasn't too much production at that point. You know, bands weren't like, the level of investment into production now is much greater at a smaller level. So at the time, you know, it was all house lights and, you know, you have a backdrop. Well, is your backdrop big? Is your backdrop small? Like, you know, oh, they have some lights on them. They have lights behind the drum set. Like that's crazy, you know? And so you go through this whole thing of just like, it's very easy to get sucked into that and just go, well, what are they doing? You know, and not like you're saying, learning from other bands' success is completely different than like, well, they're doing this and got them to that level. You know, for us, we had nobody in the band that could sing, and there was a lot of bands that were singing and adding singing later in the game. And it's like, you know, you're chasing all these different things instead of just looking at your own road and your own focus. And I always say, like, you know, one of the greatest compliments that I can give to, you know, Parkway Drive, using them as an example, is that they're a band who got overlooked, got, you know, looked over on tours. They might not have gotten the respect that they deserved, you know, at the time when they were kind of starting out. And now they're one of the biggest bands in heavy music. And there's never a point where they were like, I guarantee you there are moments, maybe even internally, like I've never asked them, but like there's moments probably where they're like, should we be, you know, just in our Hurley shorts and Hurley shirts? Like we're playing with all these bands that aren't in that, and we're a very heavy band, but they just always did what felt right to them. And that's like, you know, and it's gotten them pretty damn far. And so I think there's a lot to be said about that, because, you know, they surpassed and toured with the bands that I toured with at the same time. And now they're at this level. And so much of it is just from them always trusting their gut and trusting the people that were with them as they've grown, and never second guessing the fact that's like, if I want to wear flip-flops on stage, I'm going to wear fucking flip-flops on stage.
Well,
you know?
I mean,
Like, I'm going to play these riffs. You came here for our music. I'm going to wear some flip-flops.
Now, were they selling flip-flops at the merch table? Did they tie that in?
One of my first pre-orders with them in this position was flip-flops.
How'd it do?
Is it okay?